There are 5 massive mistakes that stop photographers taking their landscapes to the next level. They cause your photos to be dull, boring and amateurish, and fail to stand out from the crowd, and it's not always obvious why they happen. I've been guilty of all 5 of these mistakes in the past, so I know how it feels when you finally solve them. So in this video, I'll reveal these 5 mistakes and I'll show you how you can quickly fix them for dramatic improvements in the quality of your photography. To start, let me show you the massive editing mistake that I see photographers making all the time that wrecks their image's credibility, because there's a small Goldilocks zone between under and over editing your photos, and if your image falls either side of that zone of awesome editing, then it can wreck your photos. So how do you know how far to go with your editing and where to stop? And why is it that you can think an edit looks great one day but not the next? Well, it happens because there's a lot more that goes into how you perceive a photo than just what you think at that moment. First, there are external factors like the time of day and the amount of light in the room, the colour of the light coming in through the window or from a light bulb, or the amount of glare and reflections on your screen, just to name a few. These external factors can change how the image actually looks to you. So if you finish an edit in a dark room, it can seem bright and colourful and vibrant to you. But then you look again in the morning with the sun beaming in through the window and it suddenly seems dull. So first there's that, but then you have some internal factors too. Stuff that's happening in your head, because your brain doesn't actually perceive things the same way all the time. It's like in the same way that when you first put a pair of socks on in the morning, you can feel them all snug and clinging to your feet. But a few minutes later you forget they're even there. So why is that? It's because we get desensitized to consistent stimuli. And the same thing happens when we stare at the computer editing images for a while. We become desensitized to the colours and the light and the contrast in our images. And when this happens, we're prone to pushing our edits more and more and more until we lose grip on what actually looks good. So what can you actually do to fix this problem? Well, first you can do what you can to control those external factors, like controlling the ambient light and keeping it consistent every time you edit. So how bright should your room actually be? Well, in the most unscientific way I can think to put it, kind of dark, but not completely dark. Now, the best way to stop desensitizing yourself to constant stimuli of colors and contrast in your shots is to simply take regular breaks from your screen. But then if you want to land your edits in that Goldilocks zone that I mentioned a minute ago, for me, I like to edit them to the point where you kind of wonder to yourself, have I gone too far? And then go away and come back the next day before making a decision about whether you have or not. Sometimes it's a yes, sometimes it's a no, but either way you'll be able to make the perfect final tweaks to your edit with fresh eyes. Now, one mistake that you can't really fix beyond a little bit of cropping here and there is a bad composition. And there's a big composition mistake that self-taught photographers make that turns dramatic landscapes into a big shot full of nothing. So let me show you what that is, so I can then show you how to fix it. And I'll be using my own images as examples because, hey, there's no shame in making mistakes. The only shame really is not doing anything to fix them once you realize that you've made them. Now, this composition mistake actually comes out in a few different ways, but they all kind of stem from the same root cause. So the first way it comes out is demonstrated by this image. When the sun started rising and the clouds overhead lit up like a Christmas tree, I really just couldn't believe my luck. But the problem was that in my excitement to capture the stunning sky, I cranked my lens open to the widest setting and just pointed it up somewhere in that general direction. Wow, what a sky. The only problem, it's a crap landscape photo. There is no composition. I just pointed my camera at the scene and pressed the button. This next image is one I took a while back, the classic leading lines road scene, kind of pointing towards Mount Cook in the background. So what's wrong with it? The funny thing about this one, it gets more obvious the further I zoom out and we see it in a thumbnail kind of view. Now, looking at it at this size, what do you actually notice? It's all road. I was in this stunning mountainous region of New Zealand and I took a photo of asphalt. So what actually happened? Why did I take this photo this way? What one mistake links these two images and how can you fix it? Well, in both examples, I was basically in awe of the scene in front of me, which made me want to just capture as much of it as possible. So I went wide with my lens, pointed the camera in a kind of rough direction, and I took the shot. Now, the problem this caused in the first sunrise photo is that there was no real subject and the image was all sky and nothing else. The problem this caused with the second shot is that wide-angle lenses really emphasize the foreground and make far away things seem really small compared to how they actually appear in real life. Now, Mount Cook was my clear subject in this shot, but because I took this one at a reasonably wide 33mm focal length, the foreground looks massive and Mount Cook is totally diminished way off there in the background. So what could or should I have done instead? Well, 1, I should have thought more about what my subject was actually supposed to be, and 2, I should have used a focal length that makes that subject the main thing in the composition. In other words, I should have zoomed in. And unfortunately, I didn't do that at the time, but with a quick crop, I can show you how much better it could have looked if I had have. The essence of what I tried to do in the original shot is the same, with the road and the leading lines, but the composition is much tighter and stronger now that it's all about the mountain and not the road. Now, I didn't need to do any exposure bracketing for this mountain scene, but it is often a requirement in high contrast scenes like sunrise and sunset, and this regularly leads to a big mistake that destroys the realism of your edits. You start off with the best intentions to blend the amazing looking bright sky with the well exposed detail in the shadowy foreground, and then you make the bright sky a bit darker so that all those rich colours come through. And then you lighten up those dark shadows to see all the detail and texture that's hidden in them. You keep going, and before you know it, your image starts looking more and more like a weird kind of painting than a natural landscape photo. See, there's a precise point when an exposure blended shot goes from looking natural to looking unnatural. But how do you know where that point is? You can ask yourself a simple question that helps you basically analyze the natural balance between the parts that you're blending together. Now, bear with me because it might sound a bit too obvious a question, but the reason so many blended landscapes look weird is because the photographer didn't ask it. So it really is just a prompt, or a reminder really, to think about how far you're blending the dark and light areas together. Here's the question. Is the sky too dark compared to the foreground? See, I told you it's simple, right? But the thing is, most of the time a blended photo looks weird. It's because the photographer has made the sky too dark compared to the foreground and lost the balance between what should be light and what should be dark. Now, even if you do manage to make the perfect natural looking exposure blend and bring out the very best in the scene, there's still another mistake that can be the difference between a photo feeling unfinished and one that just has the X factor with that polished and professional look and feel. But this mistake isn't about something that you might be doing, it's about something you're probably not doing. The thing is though, it seems so easy to do that it actually feels a bit like cheating. Here's an image I've edited almost to completion. Looks pretty good, nice exposure blend, good composition, colourful. Checks all the boxes. So what's missing? Well, let me flip to the version after using this technique and you can see the difference. Now it looks so much more polished. So let me just flip back to the previous version and suddenly it looks like a complete mess with all these horrible distracting details all over the place. So it looks almost like somebody sneezed on the screen, right? Now this works wonders at taking an image up to a 10 out of 10, but a photo only has the potential to be a 10 if you're not making the mistake number 5. I'll show you what that is in a second. First though, here's the simple method for adding this awesome polished appearance. Simply add an empty new layer on top of your image, and then with the spot healing brush tool, just go around the image, removing the obvious and the less obvious distractions. The obvious ones are little bits and pieces like stray stones, seaweed, bubbles in the sand, actual physical things in the scene, and the less obvious ones are all the tiny specular highlights like hotspots of bright white pixels that are overexposed. Now the thing is, and the reason they often get overlooked, is that they all seem like such small and insignificant things just by themselves. But when you add up the effect of removing them all from your photo at once, it just looks so much more polished. Now this next mistake can severely limit the potential of your landscape compositions, even when you do everything right. It stems from basically relying on things like the rule of thirds to line up the elements in your scene. See, this image follows the rule of thirds. And so does this one. And so does this one. So what do all three have in common? They're boring. Why is that? Sure, the subject in the foreground is on the thirds intersection, but what else does this composition have going for it, really? There's all this empty space over here doing absolutely nothing. When that happens, you have no reason to look over that side of the frame. So that begs the question, why even include it in the shot? Now the good news is that you can create dynamic and balanced compositions in a way that doesn't rely on any other compositional guide like the rule of thirds, golden ratio, etc. So watch this video next to find out what it is and how to do it.